Chapter 4, Part 2. "And I reckon it's about time you read your letter." Harry stretched out his hand at last to take the yellowish envelope, addressed in emerald green ink to Mr. H. Potter, the floor, hut on the rock, the sea. He pulled out the letter and read, "Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Headmaster, Albus Dumbledore. Order of Merlin, First Class. Grand Sorcerer, Chief Warlock, Supreme Mugwump International Confederation of Wizards. Dear Mr. Potter, we are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Please find enclosed a list of all necessary books and equipment. Term begins September 1. We await your owl by no later than July 31st. Yours sincerely, Minerva McGonagall, Deputy Headmistress." Questions exploded inside Harry's head like fireworks, and he couldn't decide which to ask first. After a few minutes he stammered, "What does it mean, they await my owl?" "Galloping Gorgons, that reminds me," said Hagrid, clapping a hand to his forehead with enough force to knock over a cart horse, and from yet another pocket inside his overcoat he pulled an owl. A real, live, rather ruffled-looking owl, a long quill, and a roll of parchment. With his tongue between his teeth he scribbled a note that Harry could read upside down. "Dear Professor Dumbledore," gave Harry his letter, "taking him to buy his things tomorrow. Weather's horrible. Hope you're well. Hagrid." Hagrid rolled up the note, gave it to the owl, which clamped it in its beak, went to the door, and threw the owl out into the storm. Then he came back and sat down, as though this was as normal as talking on the telephone. Harry realized his mouth was open, and closed it quickly. "Where was I?" said Hagrid, but at that moment Uncle Vernon, still ashen-faced but looking very angry, moved into the firelight. "He's not going," he said. Hagrid grunted. "I'd like to see a great muggle like you stop him," he said. "A what?" said Harry, interested. "A muggle," said Hagrid. "It's what we call non-magic folk like them. And it's your bad luck you grew up in a family of the biggest muggles I ever laid eyes on." "We swore when he took him in we'd put a stop to this rubbish," said Uncle Vernon. "Swore we'd stamp it out of him. Wizard indeed." "You knew," said Harry. "You knew I'm a wizard?" "Knew!" shrieked Aunt Petunia suddenly. "Knew! Of course we knew. How could you not be, my dratted sister being what she was? Oh, she got a letter just like that and disappeared off to that school, and came home every vacation with her pockets full of frog spawn, turning teacups into rats. I was the only one who saw her for what she was, a freak. But for my mother and father, oh no, it was Lily this and Lily that. They were proud of having a witch in the family." She stopped to draw a deep breath, and then went ranting on. It seems she had been wanting to say all this for years. "Then she met that Potter at school, and they left and got married and had you. And of course I knew you'd be just the same, just as strange, just as abnormal. And then, if you please, she went and got herself blown up, and we got landed with you." Harry had gone very white. As soon as he found his voice, he said, "Blown up? You told me they died in a car crash." "Car crash!" roared Hagrid, jumping up so angrily that the Dursleys scuttled back to the corner. "How could a car crash kill Lily and James Potter? It's an outrage, a scandal. Harry Potter not knowing his own story when every kid in our world knows his name." "But why? What happened?" Harry asked urgently. The anger faded from Hagrid's face. He looked suddenly anxious. "I never expected this," he said, in a low, worried voice. "I had no idea, when Dumbledore told me there might be trouble getting hold of you, how much you didn't know. Harry, I don't know if I'm the right person to tell you, but someone's gotta. You can't go off to Hogwarts not knowing." He threw a dirty look at the Dursleys. "Well, it's best you know as much as I can tell you. Mind, I can't tell you everything. It's a great mystery, parts of it." He sat down, stared into the fire for a few seconds, and then said, "It begins, I suppose, with a person called... But it's incredible you don't know his name. Everyone in our world knows." "Who?" "Well, I don't like saying the name if I can't help it. No one does." "Why not?" "Gulping gargoyles, Harry. People are still scared. Blimey, this is difficult. See, there was this wizard who went bad. As bad as you could go. Worse than that. His name was..." Hagrid gulped, but no words came out. "Could you write it down?" Harry suggested. "Nah, can't spell it." "All right. Voldemort." Hagrid shuddered. "Don't make me say it again. Anyway, this wizard, about 20 years ago, started looking for followers. Got 'em, too. Some were afraid. Some just wanted a bit of his power. 'Cause he was getting himself power, all right. Dark days, Harry. Didn't know who to trust. Didn't dare get friendly with strange wizards or witches. Terrible things happened. He was taken over. Of course, some stood up to him, and he killed them. Horribly. One of the only safe places left was Hogwarts. Reckon Dumbledore's the only one you know who was ever afraid of. Didn't dare try taking to school. Not just then, anyway. Now, your mum and dad were as good a witch and wizard as I ever knew. Head boy and girl at Hogwarts of their day. Suppose the mystery is why you know who never tried to get him on his side before. Probably knew they were too close to Dumbledore to want anything to do with the dark side. Maybe he thought he could persuade him. Maybe he just wanted him out of the way. All anyone knows is he turned up in the village when you were all living on Halloween 10 years ago. You were just a year old. He came to your house and Hagrid suddenly pulled out a very dirty, spotted handkerchief and blew his nose with a sound like a foghorn. "Sorry," he said, "but it's that sad. Now your mum and dad and nicer people you couldn't find. Anyway, you know who killed him. And this is the real mystery of the thing. He tried to kill you, too. Wanted to make a clean job of it, I suppose, or maybe he just liked killing by then. But he couldn't do it. Never wondered how you got that mark on your forehead. That was no ordinary cut. That's what you got when a powerful, evil curse touches you. Took care of your mom and dad and your house even. But it didn't work on you, and that's why you're famous, Harry. No one ever lived after he decided to kill him. No one except you. And he killed some of the best witches and wizards of the age. The McKinnons, the Bones, the Pruitts. And you was only a baby, and you lived." Something very painful was going on in Harry's mind. As Hagrid's story came to a close, he saw again the blinding flash of green light, more clearly than he had ever remembered it before. And he remembered something else, for the first time in his life. A high, cold, cruel laugh. Hagrid was watching him sadly. "Took you from the ruined house myself on Dumbledore's orders. Brought you to this lot." "Lord of old Tosh!" said Uncle Vernon. Harry jumped. He had almost forgotten that the Dursleys were there. Uncle Vernon certainly seemed to have got back his courage. He was glaring at Hagrid, and his fists were clenched. "Now you listen here, boy," he snarled. "I accept there's something strange about you, probably nothing a good beating wouldn't have cured. And as for all about this about your parents, well, they were weirdos, no denying it, and the word's better off without them, in my opinion. After for all they got getting mixed up with these wizarding types. Just what I expect. Always knew they'd come to a sticky end." But at that moment Hagrid leapt from the sofa and drew a battered pink umbrella from inside his coat. Pointing this at Uncle Vernon like a sword, he said, "I'm warning you, Dursley. I'm warning you. One more word." In danger of being speared on the end of an umbrella by a bearded giant, Uncle Vernon's courage failed again. He flattened himself against the wall and fell silent. "That's better," said Hagrid, breathing heavily and sitting back down on the sofa, which this time sagged right down to the floor. Harry, meanwhile, still had questions to ask, hundreds of them. What happened to you know who? Good question, Harry. Disappeared. Vanished. Same night he tried to kill you. Makes you even more famous. That's the biggest mystery, see? He was getting more and more powerful. Why'd he go? Some say he died. Codswallop, in my opinion. Dunno if he had enough human left in him to die. Some say he's out there still, biding his time like, but I don't believe it. People who was on his side came back to ours. Some of 'em came out of kind of trances. Don't reckon they could have done if he was coming back. Most of us reckon he's still out there somewhere, but lost his powers. Too weak to carry on. 'Cause something about you finished him, Harry. There was something going on that night he hadn't counted on. I don't know what it was, no one does. But something about you stumped him, all right." Hagrid looked at Harry with warmth and respect blazing in his eyes, but Harry, instead of feeling pleased and proud, felt quite sure there had been a horrible mistake. A wizard? Him? How could he possibly be? He spent his life being clouded by Dudley and bullied by Aunt Petunia and Uncle Vernon. If he was really a wizard, why hadn't they been turned into warty toads every time they'd tried to lock him in a cupboard? If he'd once defeated the greatest sorcerer in the world, how come Dudley had been able to kick him around like a football?